March 14, 2006. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the quiet suburban town of Ashford, Ohio slipped into a silence so deep it felt unnatural, as if the streets themselves were holding their breath. Porch lights glowed softly, sprinklers clicked off, and somewhere in the distance a train horn faded into the dark. What no one knew then was that this ordinary Tuesday night would become the date every resident would remember for the rest of their lives. Because behind the closed doors of a pale blue house on Cedar Lane, something irreversible had already begun. Police would later describe the scene using careful words, but neighbors would use a simpler one: evil. The house belonged to the Harris family, a name that meant nothing to the nation until sunrise. By noon, satellite trucks would crowd the block, yellow tape would wrap around mailboxes, and reporters would repeat the same question again and again. How could this happen here? Ashford was the kind of place where people waved at strangers, where kids rode bikes past dinner time, where crime was something that happened somewhere else. That illusion shattered when a 911 call came in, short, broken, and trembling, ending abruptly before the operator could ask a second question. When officers arrived minutes later, they found the front door unlocked, the television still glowing in the living room, and a smell they would never forget. Upstairs, time seemed frozen. A bedroom light was on. A clock blinked 12 wag, and on the floor lay evidence that told a story far darker than anyone was prepared to hear. Investigators quickly realized this was not a burglary, not a random act, and not something that happened in a moment of panic. It was deliberate. It was personal. And it had been building quietly, invisibly, for years. As dawn approached and flashing lights painted the houses red and blue, one truth became painfully clear. The person responsible had not come from the shadows outside, but from within the circle of trust itself. What unfolded next would expose hidden resentments, secret messages, and a trail of warnings no one noticed until it was far too late. By sunrise, Ashford no longer felt like a town but a crime scene pretending to be one. Detectives moved slowly through the Harris house, careful not to disturb details that might explain what words could not. In the master bedroom, they found signs of a struggle that never reached the hallway, suggesting whoever was inside never tried to run. Family photos lined the dresser, smiling faces frozen in time, their normalcy clashing violently with what lay beneath the sheets. There was no forced entry anywhere in the home. Windows were locked. Valuables sat untouched. This wasn't theft, and it wasn't random. It was something planned, something carried out by someone who knew the layout, the habits, and the routines. Outside, neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering theories that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Some mentioned a strange argument weeks earlier. Others recalled seeing lights on late at night. Everyone remembered something, but none of it made sense yet. Police canvassed the block, knocking on doors, collecting fragments of conversations and half-remembered moments. One neighbor described hearing a car engine idling around 1:45 a.m., then driving away slowly, not speeding, not panicked. Another reported a figure standing on the Harris porch earlier that evening, talking calmly before entering. Calm was the word that kept coming up, and it disturbed investigators deeply. Inside the house, a laptop sat open on the kitchen table, its screen dimmed but not closed. When technicians powered it up, they discovered a trail of late-night searches, private messages, and unsent emails filled with resentment, fear, and quiet desperation. These were not the thoughts of someone snapped in a moment. They were the thoughts of someone counting down. Autopsies would later confirm the timeline matched the digital evidence almost perfectly, narrowing the window of death to less than 20 minutes. 20 minutes in which someone moved room to room without hesitation. 20 minutes that erased an entire future. As word spread beyond Ashford, media coverage intensified, and with it came speculation that threatened to drown out facts. Police refused to name a suspect, but privately they were already circling someone no one expected. Because the deeper they looked, the clearer it became that this crime was rooted not in hatred from outside, but in betrayal from someone who had once been welcomed inside without question.
As investigators tightened their focus, One name began surfacing repeatedly in interviews, phone records, and private conversations that had never been meant to see daylight. It wasn't a stranger, a drifter, or a masked intruder hiding in the dark. It was someone woven into the Harris family's daily lives so tightly that their presence had never raised alarm. Detectives reviewed security footage from nearby homes, frame by frame, watching the quiet street breathe through the night. At 1:42 a.m., a familiar vehicle appeared, rolling past the Harris house, slowing, then stopping without headlights. The driver sat there for nearly 3 minutes before stepping out and walking calmly to the front door. No hesitation, no rush. The timestamp aligned perfectly with cell phone pings and a final outgoing text message that read, "I'm here." That message was never answered. When police traced it, they discovered a relationship marked by tension, unresolved conflict, and a history of emotional manipulation that had escalated in recent months. Friends described arguments that ended abruptly whenever someone entered the room. Co-workers mentioned sudden mood changes, obsessive behavior, and an intense fear of being abandoned. None of it had seemed criminal at the time, it just seemed personal. Inside the house, forensic teams uncovered details that told a chilling story of control. Doors locked from the inside, blinds carefully closed. A radio left playing softly in the living room, as if meant to mask sounds no one was supposed to hear. This wasn't chaos, it was containment. The suspect, when finally brought in for questioning, appeared composed, even cooperative, answering questions without visible emotion. But detectives noticed inconsistencies, small shifts in the timeline, pauses before simple answers, an inability to explain why their phone had been turned off for exactly 27 minutes. When confronted with evidence, the calm began to fracture. And then came silence. Hours passed before a single sentence changed everything. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." That admission wasn't a confession, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what investigators already knew, that the crime had not been an accident, but the final outcome of a private storm that had been building behind polite smiles and closed doors. As the case moved toward arrest, the town of Ashford faced a realization more disturbing than any headline. The danger had never announced itself. It had blended in, attended dinners, shared laughter, and waited patiently for the moment no one was watching. The arrest sent a shockwave through Ashford that no amount of police presence could contain. When officers led the suspect out in handcuffs, cameras flashing, the crowd fell into an uneasy silence broken only by whispered disbelief. This was not the face people had imagined. There was no wild expression, no visible rage, just a hollow calm that felt more unsettling than anger ever could. In the days that followed, investigators began reconstructing the weeks leading up to March 14, uncovering a pattern that now seemed obvious in hindsight. Phone records revealed dozens of unanswered calls, messages that shifted from affectionate to accusatory, then to desperate. Emails were drafted and deleted, some saved automatically in fragments, hinting at threats never fully written but clearly intended. Friends recalled moments when conversations suddenly turned dark, when jealousy disguised itself as concern, when control was framed as care. Yet no one had called the police, no one believed it could end in violence. Court documents later revealed that the suspect had visited the Harris home multiple times that month, always welcomed, always trusted. Neighbors remembered seeing them help carry groceries, laugh on the porch, even babysit on one occasion. That familiarity became one of the prosecution's strongest points. This crime was only possible because access had never been questioned. During the preliminary hearing, the courtroom overflowed with spectators, many standing along the walls just to witness the proceedings. The suspect listened as prosecutors outlined the timeline, each minute accounted for, each movement traced. Surveillance footage, digital footprints, and forensic analysis formed a narrative so tight it left little room for doubt. Defense attorneys attempted to introduce emotional instability, claiming a breaking point had been reached, but the evidence told a colder story. Planning, preparation, intent. The most chilling moment came when a recorded interview was played, allowing jurors to hear the suspect's own voice describing the night in detached, almost procedural terms. Gasps echoed through the room. Some looked away. Others stared, unable to reconcile the calm tone with the horror it described. Outside the courthouse, the Harris family's remaining relatives spoke only once, issuing a brief statement asking for privacy and urging people not to speculate online. Their restraint stood in stark contrast to the media frenzy that followed, with commentators dissecting every detail, every photo, every past interaction. But beneath the noise, a deeper question haunted Ashford and towns like it across the country. How many warning signs are missed simply because the threat doesn't look like one? How many dangers are ignored because they arrive wearing a familiar face? Weeks of investigation revealed layers of deception that no one could have anticipated. The suspect had meticulously erased physical evidence, leaving only digital breadcrumbs for investigators to follow. Security cameras in neighboring homes were disabled at the precise times needed to avoid capturing certain angles. Even the household pets, usually noisy and reactive to intruders, had been sedated in advance, ensuring no alarm would be raised. Detectives realized that this level of premeditation indicated not only intent but a disturbing level of obsession. Friends and acquaintances were interviewed repeatedly, and a pattern emerged of someone carefully observing routines, learning habits, memorizing every lock and key, every window and passage. Social media posts and location data confirmed hours spent near the Harris residence, seemingly idle, but actually a covert reconnaissance of a plan that would culminate in tragedy. Psychologists brought in by law enforcement described the suspect as someone exhibiting traits of extreme control, manipulation, and emotional detachment, capable of executing a violent act with chilling calm. The community, meanwhile, struggled to process the enormity of what had occurred. Candlelight vigils were held in the town square, neighbors leaving flowers, notes, and stuffed animals, all silent tributes to innocence lost. Local newspapers ran detailed accounts, each story emphasizing the warning signs that had been missed, the small moments of tension now magnified in hindsight. Psychologists and true crime experts began appearing on national networks, dissecting motives, personality traits, and missed opportunities for intervention. Yet, amid all this analysis, the central horror remained. The suspect had been someone entirely within reach, someone who had shared meals, conversations, and even laughter with the family, only to betray that trust in the most irreversible way possible. In the courtroom, each piece of evidence was laid bare, a mosaic of premeditation that left jurors grappling with the reality of intimate betrayal. Letters written in the days prior, text messages sent and deleted, and surveillance footage aligned in a damning narrative that spoke louder than any testimony. By the time closing arguments were delivered, the case had evolved from a shocking local tragedy into a chilling study of how familiarity can mask danger, and how obsession can transform the ordinary into the extraordinarily deadly. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom became a theater of tension, each day peeling back layers of motive and calculation that stunned even seasoned legal observers. Prosecutors meticulously presented a timeline that traced the suspect's movements with precision, every text, every deleted email, every sudden change in routine meticulously aligned with the act itself. Forensic experts demonstrated how traces of DNA were carefully avoided, fingerprints wiped clean, and how the suspect had manipulated the physical environment to give the illusion of chaos where none truly existed. Witnesses testified to subtle behavioral changes in the weeks preceding the crime, small, almost invisible cues that, in retrospect, screamed warning. Friends described strained conversations, controlling tendencies, sudden disappearances, and obsessive monitoring of the Harris family's social and professional interactions. Psychologists were called to explain the dangerous mix of envy, resentment, and psychological obsession that had culminated in the tragedy. They described a mindset capable of detailed planning and careful execution, motivated not by rage in the moment, but by a calculated desire to assert dominance and control. Outside the courtroom, Ashford struggled to comprehend that evil could wear such a familiar face, that the person everyone trusted could orchestrate a horror so intimate and precise. National media outlets descended, offering replays of interviews, recreations, and analyses, turning a small town's nightmare into a cautionary tale broadcast across the country. Families across the nation began questioning their own circles, wondering whether any moment of trust might hide potential peril. By the time the defense had presented its arguments, claiming emotional instability and unintentional harm, the jury had already absorbed weeks of evidence, surveillance footage, and expert testimony that left little room for doubt. The suspect's calm demeanor, once unnerving, now seemed almost rehearsed, an indication that every movement, every word, and every silence had been part of a carefully constructed facade. When closing arguments were delivered, the prosecution's final words emphasized betrayal, planning, and intimate knowledge, driving home the core truth. This was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a chilling orchestration rooted in obsession and methodical calculation. The courtroom held its collective breath as the jury retired to deliberate, knowing that the verdict would determine not only justice for the Harris family, but also set a precedent for how intimate betrayal is recognized in cases of premeditated murder. Verdict day arrived with palpable tension gripping every corner of Ashford, as residents, family members, and media outlets waited for the conclusion of a case that had haunted the town since that fateful night. Inside the courthouse, The jury returned after hours of deliberation, their faces unreadable, leaving a silence that pressed heavily on everyone present. When the four persons spoke, the words were simple, yet carried a weight that reverberated far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Guilty on all counts. The room erupted briefly with gasps and murmurs, though the suspect remained eerily composed, their expression blank yet somehow conveying an unsettling acceptance of what had been confirmed. Outside, cameras captured the emotional release of family members who had endured months of fear, speculation, and grief, their tears now mixed with relief. Investigators reflected privately on the case, recognizing the rare convergence of meticulous planning, digital forensics, and community vigilance that had made justice possible. Yet even with the verdict, the shadow of what happened lingered, raising questions that would not be easily answered. How had the suspect concealed motives so effectively? How could neighbors, friends, and even family members have missed the subtle warning signs? True crime experts dissected the case across podcasts, television programs, and articles, emphasizing that this tragedy was both deeply personal and a lesson in vigilance. Ashford itself became a hub for conversation on prevention, awareness, and the limits of trust within communities that once prided themselves on safety and neighborly camaraderie. Psychological studies published in the months following the verdict highlighted the dangerous patterns of obsession, control, and manipulation, using the case as a stark example of premeditated violence masked by familiarity. Meanwhile, the Harris family began the slow process of rebuilding, working with counselors, law enforcement, and neighbors to restore a sense of safety in a world that had felt irrevocably broken. They spoke carefully about the lessons learned, focusing on awareness and proactive engagement rather than vengeance. Yet the emotional scars remained, and the memory of that night, March 14, 2006, continued to haunt the quiet streets, reminding everyone that evil can sometimes wear the most ordinary and trusted faces. While the suspect was transferred to a high-security facility awaiting sentencing, the community grappled with the lingering reality. Intimacy, familiarity, and trust, though vital, can be manipulated to devastating effect when combined with obsession and meticulous intent. Months passed, and Ashford attempted to return to a semblance of normalcy, though nothing would ever feel entirely the same. Community meetings were held to discuss safety protocols, mental health awareness, and the importance of recognizing subtle signs of distress or obsession. Families shared experiences, neighbors formed watch groups, and schools integrated programs to teach children about boundaries, trust, and warning signals in relationships. Experts frequently referenced the Harris case as a benchmark for understanding how domestic premeditation could unfold without public notice, emphasizing that meticulous observation and preparation often leave nearly invisible traces. Despite extensive therapy, counseling, and support, the Harris family continued to confront grief, memory, and trauma, navigating the delicate balance between mourning and rebuilding. Investigators reviewed case files repeatedly, noting patterns and minutiae that might prevent similar tragedies elsewhere, while journalists wrote comprehensive retrospectives for national audiences. The suspect, now isolated in a high-security wing, engaged with psychologists and legal counsel, detailing the planning stages, motives, and emotional manipulations that led to the crime. These insights, though deeply disturbing, contributed to understanding the psychology of premeditated domestic violence and informed law enforcement practices nationwide. Meanwhile, Ashford residents maintained a cautious optimism, aware that vigilance, communication, and awareness were crucial to protecting their community. Memorials persisted, with flowers, photos, and written notes kept at a local park, a quiet reminder of lives disrupted and innocence lost. Over time, law enforcement agencies across the United States used the case as training material, demonstrating the importance of digital forensics, pattern recognition, and early intervention in seemingly mundane situations. In classrooms, lectures, and safety workshops, the Harris case was discussed not merely as a horror story, but as a critical lesson in human behavior, trust, and the potential for violence to hide behind the ordinary. Every year, as March 14 approached, Ashford paused to remember not only the victims but the broader implications for communities nationwide. Though the suspect remained behind bars, the story continued to ripple outward, a cautionary tale highlighting the fragility of trust, the consequences of obsession, and the haunting reminder that evil sometimes moves quietly, meticulously, and unnoticed until it is far too late. The final chapter of this tragic story saw justice formally served, with the court delivering a life sentence without parole, cementing accountability for actions that shattered a family and reverberated through an entire town. Yet, even with legal closure, the lessons remained. Vigilance, awareness, and understanding of human behavior are as crucial as locks, alarms, and neighborhood watches. Ashford became a symbol of resilience, a community determined to honor victims while learning from tragedy. Families strengthened bonds, neighbors engaged in open dialogue, and law enforcement adopted practices influenced directly by the meticulous investigation that uncovered every hidden detail of the crime. Psychologists emphasized the ongoing need for mental health resources, warning that premeditated domestic violence often masquerades behind charm, familiarity, and routine. The Harris family, while scarred, continued advocating for awareness, creating programs to educate parents, children, and communities on recognizing dangerous patterns before tragedy strikes. Media retrospectives documented the story repeatedly, balancing the horrifying nature of the crime with constructive discussions on prevention, trust, and observation. Even years later, March 14 serves as a chilling reminder that the ordinary can mask the extraordinary danger lurking close to home. As Ashford rebuilt its sense of community, the case also reached audiences nationwide, sparking conversations, debates, and lessons learned in schools, workplaces, and homes. And while the shadow of that night will never fully fade, the resilience of the town, the dedication of law enforcement, and the pursuit of justice provide a beacon of hope. If you found this story chilling, eye-opening, or gripping, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories, dark mysteries, and real-life suspense that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Every story reminds us to stay aware, stay vigilant, and never underestimate the danger that can hide behind the most familiar faces.